Sally Field says the truth hits her harder now than it ever did on set. She talks about Robin Williams with a kind of quiet honesty that pulls you in. Like she is still trying to make sense of a man who could make a room explode with laughter one second and fall into a silence that felt too heavy the next. She is 79 now, and when she looks back at Mrs. Doubtfire, she remembers far more than the jokes or the chaos of filming. She remembers a man who lived at full speed because slowing down scared him. She says Robin never arrived at a room. He burst into it. Even when the cameras were off, he seemed powered by something that would not let him rest. She laughs when she describes him jumping between characters during lunch like he was trying to outpace his own thoughts. But she also remembers watching him closely. She says there were flashes, tiny ones, where the performance slipped. His eyes would go still, and something raw moved through them. It was so quick that most people missed it. She never did. She talks about those moments with a softness that makes you picture them. A man who could not stop giving because he was terrified of what would catch him if he stopped for even a moment. She says she understands him better now than she did then. Back on set, she only felt the intensity of his energy and the weight of something she could not name. Now she calls it a shield. His jokes kept the dark away. People who worked with him loved telling stories about the wild, brilliant Robin. Sally tells stories about the quiet one, about the man who could read a room like he was reading a person's thoughts. She remembers going through something difficult during filming, something she never talked about. Robin noticed anyway. He did not push. He did not ask. He just found small ways to make the day easier. A cup of coffee placed beside her, without mention. Standing between her and people who drained her. A tiny accident with spilled water that bought her a few minutes to collect herself. She knows now that he did these things often for many people. Gentle, careful, unnoticed. She says loving him meant understanding both versions of him. The unstoppable force and the vulnerable man hiding inside it. Being near him felt like standing in the middle of a storm you could not look away from. She would leave conversations with him feeling change, like the air around her had shifted. She also felt tired sometimes, the kind of tired that comes from watching someone fight a battle you know you cannot fix. There were rare moments when he stopped moving. She says those were the moments that stay with her. Robin would fall quiet just for a breath and look directly at her. No jokes, no voices, no characters. Only a man who understood people more deeply than he ever let on. Those moments were short. They never lasted. But they told her everything about the weight he carried. She thinks about him often. She wonders what it felt like to live inside a mind that brilliant without any rest. She wonders how he handled the noise in his own head. She says he gave so much to the world that no one ever questioned how much it cost him to give it. When she talks about him now, her voice holds two feelings at once. She smiles because he made her laugh like no one else. And she aches because she saw the sadness beneath the laughter long before the world realized how deep it went. She says she loved him, not in a romantic way, but in a way that only happens when two artists recognize something true in each other, something rare and painful and beautiful. She remembers him as a man who changed every room he walked into, and yet felt alone in ways no one could fully reach. And she remembers him as the person who noticed her pain without a word, the person who understood people better than he understood himself. In her voice you hear gratitude. You hear grief. You hear a love shaped by truth instead of fantasy. She gives you a picture of a man who made the world laugh while trying to keep his own darkness from breaking through. You come away understanding him in a new way, not as a legend, but as a human being who carried more than anyone knew. Sally Field talks about Robin Williams in a way that makes you feel like you're standing beside her, seeing the man the world never really saw. She remembers how different he was when the cameras weren't rolling. People think of him as the center of the room, the one who pulled all attention toward him with jokes and wild characters. But she keeps coming back to the quieter version of him, the one who would slide into the background the moment he sensed someone else needed space. She says that part of him was just as real as a comedy, maybe even more revealing. She remembers how he adjusted himself to match the people around him. If someone looked overwhelmed, he would bring his energy down without anyone asking. If an actor struggled during a scene, he shifted the mood to give them breathing room. She says he calibrated himself like he was tuning an instrument, always trying to make sure people felt safe near him. Chris Columbus noticed it too. He remembers moments when Robin would deliberately dim his spark because someone else needed the light more. It wasn't about applause. It wasn't about being noticed. It was instinct. And Sally thinks that instinct came from a familiar place. She says Robin saw pain in others because he understood it too well in himself. He knew what it felt like to smile through something no one else could see. He knew how heavy life feels when you have to protect the people around you from your own sadness. She says that's why he treated everyone the same, from big stars to the quiet crew members who barely spoke. He remembered details about their families. He noticed when someone looked tired. He made sure the set felt like a place where everyone mattered. For someone who lived in so much emotional noise, he still found a way to tune into everyone else. Sally says his comedy and his empathy were tied together. The reason he could create such sharp, perfect impressions was because he studied people with total focus. He noticed tiny shifts in expression, tiny changes in tone, tiny cracks in someone's armor. And those same observations let him see when someone needed comfort. His watching wasn't about performing. It was about understanding. She carries those moments with her, the small ones that didn't make headlines. Not declarations, not dramatic speeches, just presence. Just being there in a way that made her feel understood without having to explain anything. But when he died, her grief wasn't simple. When the world found out he was gone, people cried and asked how someone so full of life could reach such a dark place. Sally didn't have that confusion. She had something sharper. She says she felt anger, not at him, but at everything that surrounded him, at the suffering she saw in glimpses, at the signs she recognized but couldn't decode. She describes it like standing next to someone who is too close to a cliff. No, you can't drag them back no matter how much you want to. She had noticed years earlier that his jokes weren't always jokes. Sometimes they were shields. Sometimes they were alarms. Sometimes they were the only thing standing between him and the feelings he didn't want to face. She remembers trying to look past the humor, trying to read his eyes, and seeing a sadness that came and went like a shadow. She understood something was wrong. She didn't know how wrong. He had a way of shutting down worry before it could reach him. If you tried to ask how he was doing, he'd fire off a perfect joke before the question landed. He could disarm concern faster than anyone she'd ever met. It wasn't manipulation. It was survival. It was how he kept the world from getting too close to his pain. When she learned about the Lewy body diagnosis, everything fell into place. This man whose mind was his livelihood, whose sharpness defined him, was battling a disease designed to take those things away. She can barely talk about the terror he must have felt, and her anger shifted into something heavier. Not anger at him. Anger at the cruelty of his circumstances. Anger at how someone so sensitive, so bright, had to face something so devastating alone inside his own head. She wonders whether she or anyone else could have helped him. She knows the truth, even if she hates it. Loving someone isn't the same as saving them. She saw the signs. She saw the frantic pace, the sudden quiet, the painful flashes of sadness. She knew he was fighting something. She just couldn't reach it. She says that is a lesson she carries. You can love someone. You can understand them. You can see their pain. But sometimes you still can't pull them back. Sometimes all you can do is stand with them for a moment and hope they feel less alone, even if they never say it out loud. She thinks about him often. She remembers the force of his presence, the warmth of his attention, the chaos of his brilliance, and the fragility he tried so hard to hide. And she talks about him now because she wants people to understand the man behind the laughter, the man who saw everyone else clearly but struggled to face his own shadows. Sally Field says the world mourned a legend, but the people who knew Robin Williams lost something far more personal. She talks about that loss with a heaviness that lingers in her voice, like she is still trying to carry the weight of questions that will never have answers. She remembers thinking the same thing everyone who loved him quietly whispered to themselves. Could we have done more? Could I have reached him in time? She admits she still doesn't know, and she doubts she ever will. When she speaks about him now, she draws a line between the man the world adored and the man she saw in unguarded moments. She wants people to understand that behind the genius was someone deeply human, someone who felt life with a kind of intensity that most people never experience. She calls him wounded and sensitive, someone who made millions laugh while holding back a darkness he didn't want anyone else to feel. She says that fear drove him, that the thought of stopping, even for a moment, terrified him. She remembers the way his mind worked. Fast, brilliant, almost too sharp for its own good. Everything around him filtered through this intense internal storm, and she could see how exhausting it must have been. She realized years later that his gifts and his pain were woven together, each one feeding the other. His speed, his empathy, his humor, his fragility, all coming from the same place. She says the world saw the fire, but she saw the cost of keeping it burning. She talks about how carefully he built the public version of himself. Not as a lie, but as a shield. He knew what people expected of him. The quick wit, the voices, the chaos. And he gave it, even when it drained him. She thinks he did it out of love, out of fear, out of instinct, maybe all three. She says he needed the noise to keep the darker thought away, and at the same time he wanted everyone around to feel joy, even when he didn't. She remembers the rare moments when he dropped the act, moments when the room felt still for the first time all day, when he wasn't trying to entertain anyone. She says those glimpses showed the real man, the one who saw through people with a clarity that felt almost startling. Those were the moments she treasures most. They were brief, fragile, and honest. She could see an entire world of thought and feeling in his eyes. She says he understood the heart in a way most people never do. She thinks that is why losing him hurt the way it did. Not because he was famous, not because he was funny, but because he was a person whose depths went far beyond what the world ever knew. She says his pain didn't erase his brilliance, and his brilliance didn't erase his pain. They existed side by side inside him, every day, every hour. She carries the truth now that even love and understanding are not always enough to save someone from their own battles. She talks about that realization quietly, almost as if she is speaking to herself. She loved him. She saw him. But she couldn't fix the parts of him that hurt, and she has had to learn how to live with that. She says real love means accepting someone exactly as they are, even when you know you cannot rescue them. It means staying beside them, even when their darkness scares you. It means holding space for the whole person, the light and the shadow, the laughter and the fear. And when she talked about Robin Williams today, you feel her doing exactly that, holding the full truth of who he was, a man who gave joy to the world, who fought battles no one else would feel, who let her see pieces of the real him in moments that came and went like brief openings in a storm. A man she could not save, but one she loved with a kind of honesty that still shows every time she says his name.